exam technique video for students and teachers of A Level Psychology, looking at a 2-mark application question from the biological section of summer 2022's paper 1. So the question is here, and it's part of a larger question which I will now quickly take you through so you've got the context. So Tabitha wanted to investigate whether there is a difference in brain activity when people are exposed to aggressive stimuli and non-aggressive stimuli. She decided to gather a sample of female participants aged between 20 years old and 30 years old. So the first part of the question is a 2-marker, describe how she could use a volunteer sampling technique. Then there's a 3-marker, describe how she could use a PET brain scanning technique for her investigation. Then the one we're going to look at in detail in the rest of this video, explain one's strength of using the PET branding technique for her investigation, and then 2 marks finally for explaining an improvement. Now, I'd just like to really take a moment to highlight these words because they're key to understanding what the questions are looking for. For her investigation crops up at the end of the first 3 parts, and then Tabitha's choice of participants basically means the same thing. In each of these cases, you've got to apply what you know to this particular investigation. And it's quite easy to miss that while still writing a lot of good content. So if we look a little bit at assessment objectives from the mark scheme, for the question that we're going to look at, which is C, about the strength of using PET scanning techniques, there are 0 AO1 marks. That means there's no marks for demonstrating your knowledge and understanding of PET scanning. There is 1 mark for applying your knowledge to the context, which is Tabitha's investigation, and there's 1 further mark for basically explaining why that is relevant in this case. So it's described in the mark scheme, as we will see in a minute, as justifying why it's a strength. So here are 2 examples, and I'll give you a chance to pause if you'd like to read these now. On the face of it, they're very similar. You could be forgiven for thinking that the one on the left is a slightly better answer to this question. But actually the one on the left in blue got 0 marks, whereas the one on the right got both marks out of 2. So the point of this video is to look closely at the difference between them and understand what this type of question is really looking for. So the examiner's report is helpful here. The examiners wrote about this particular question that a significant proportion of candidates gave generic responses. Now, what that means is that they wrote things which were true, but they were too general and not specific to this particular investigation of Tabitha's. Where other errors were seen, it was often in the understanding of the strength of a PET scan. So several people wrote about what a PET scan was, slipping into AO1, for which there were no marks for this question, and didn't really know enough about strengths. Sticking with the mark scheme then for a moment, let's have a look at what it says for this question. So first off, it clarifies there's a mark for identifying the strength, that's AO2. There's a mark for justifying why it's a strength, which is AO3. It gives an example of how you might do that. A PET scan will give Tabitha an image of the participant's brain activity when they're watching the scenes from the films that can be checked by other researchers. And then the justification, that increases the reliability of her findings about aggression. So in both of those points, there is a link to this particular study of aggression. Generic answers score 0 marks, so you have to relate what you're writing to the scenario. This is taken from the examiner's report again. One strength of Tabitha using a PET scanner is that the scanner is very scientific, having a standardized procedure, giving the study high internal validity as the conditions will be the same for each participant. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that actually that's pretty good. They've referred to Tabitha. It actually is all kind of logical. It makes sense. It shows they know what internal validity is and so on. But this gets 0 marks because it's generic. For one, it hasn't actually linked it to Tabitha's investigation. Just mentioning her name is not enough. And secondly, it's not actually specific enough to PET scans either, because there's lots of other techniques which are scientific and use standardized procedures. So really, that's not getting anywhere near a mark. So back to our 2 examples that I showed you earlier. this is a strong answer if it was a general question about PET scanning, because it is specific to PET scans and it shows good understanding of why they produce objective data. But a bit like that last one we just looked at, it mentions Tabitha twice, but that's all the kind of context we've got. It could have been written about any PET study, and therefore it's not been applied to the context. It's considered generic, it gets 0. There we go, just to kind of hammer the point home. There's the quote from the examiner's report in orange, and the mark scheme stressing that. Whereas this one is actually not quite as detailed or clear in terms of its knowledge of PET, but there is enough here for 2 out of 2 because it has identified a strength, and this is clearly related to the scenario. It's about aggression, it's about aggressive and non-aggressive stimuli, so it's gone beyond just mentioning Tabitha's name. And then this last bit is justification. It is all kind of linked together, it logically makes sense, and therefore it's 2 out of 2. Thank you very much for watching.